Man-made. These divisions, they are man-made. We have vice. We have vice, but we cannot see. We've got to find a new way to be. This is a worldwide black family. No matter where you're from, Africa is still your home. Cuban or Dominican or Panamanian. No matter where you're from, Africa is still your home. Jamaican or American, Haitian or Brazilian. One Africa. Time has come for us to get free. It's time we break the chains of slavery. We've got to find a new way to be. This is a worldwide black family. No matter where you're from, Africa is still your home. Mexican, Colombian, or Boricano. No matter where you're from, Africa is still your home. Belizean or Peruvian, or Honduran. One Africa. Together. All they want us to do is keep on killing one another all around the world. One Africa, all around the world. One Africa, all around the world.
Black, I'm an African. From higher heights, me militant. West Africa, me from an Vatican. We were born with the light, we under the sun. Repatriation is a must, you have to liberate yourself. We tired of the war and fight, cause there is nothing you can do. Know yourself and know your history. Work out for uplift to new life. Freedom we need. God, I'm mother of civilization. Peace to the world. One love, my religion. Together we are gonna build up the nation. No matter where you come from, we are one blood. Accept one another whenever you touch road. Listen me, see links to the globe. All for one for all, so the thing go.
We got to find a new way to be. This is a worldwide black family. Woohoo! Greetings, everybody. Greetings. My name is Onya Sanu. This is my comrade Monica, and welcome to Weekly Pan-African News. We are All African People's Revolutionary Party New Mexico. We're like two. We're like a third, a fourth of APRP New Mexico. But this is our chapter's weekly live video program. We have done this program every single Thursday at 12 p.m. Mountain Time.
since the beginning of the pandemic back in spring of last year. Has it been 2 years? Has it been 1 year? I feel like I have no concept of time anymore. This pandemic just feels like it's lasted forever.
I agree. However long this pandemic's been in, that's how long the show's been.
Yes. So as long as the pandemic's been, this is how long we've been doing this. But we do this every Thursday, 12 p.m. Mountain Time. We cover a different topic in current events from a revolutionary Pan-African perspective. We come to y'all with political education. We come to y'all with updates about APIP work happening on the ground here in Tiwa territory and around the world. And we come to y'all to build, educate, and learn from you as well. So thank you so much for joining us. If you are a regular watcher of the show, then you know we do a couple of things every single time we open the show. First, we do the intro, which I just did. I also want to mention that the All African People's Revolutionary Party is a revolutionary Pan-African socialist political party founded by Kwame Nkrumah, whose birthday was on the 21st, on Founders Day. Founded by Kwame Nkrumah over 50 years ago in Ghana after Ghana gained its independence from British colonialism. Kwame Nkrumah understood that Ghana's independence was meaningless unless the rest of Africa was free, and so he called for the formation of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, and he called for us to unify the liberation and struggling organizations all over the African continent around one political objective, which is one unified socialist Africa. So that's why we exist. That's why we're here talking to you. The other thing that we always do in every intro is that we want to call in an ancestor. And the reason why we call in an ancestor is because we understand that we are part of a continuum of struggle for liberation that began the very first moment the very first European colonizers set foot on the shores of Africa, and which continues to this day. We are not reinventing the wheel. We are just contributing to a struggle that was started long before we got here. So we have to honor our ancestors because our ancestors are who made it possible for us to fight today. So the ancestor we want to call in is a man whose birthday is actually today, and that is none other than George Jackson. A new African political prisoner was born on this day, September 23rd, in 1941. You may know him as a field marshal in the Black Panther Party, one of the founders of the Black Panther Party's prison organization. He was also the author of two incredibly influential books, Soledad Brother and Blood in My Eye, both of which you can find for free online just by searching the title plus the word PDF, and you can get a free copy and read it, and you should. But George Jackson is a powerful example of the potential political education to make anybody into a revolutionary. George Jackson was not an academic. George Jackson was not someone who was like formally trained organizer with all the schools of thought. George Jackson is someone who was radicalized in prison, who became a frontline fighter and ideologue in the struggle for our people's liberation, and who was persecuted by the capitalist state for his contributions to our struggle. But they could not kill his influence. They could not kill his name. And so although he was murdered by the capitalist prison system because of the threat he posed to the capitalist system as a whole, we still remember his name, we still honor him, we still learn from him, and we still carry his example forward into the present day. So happy birthday to Comrade George Jackson on this day. The other thing that we always do in the beginning of every show is that we want to acknowledge that we are talking to y'all from stolen land. We are talking to y'all from occupied Tiwa territory, also known as the city of Albuquerque, New Mexico. The Tiwa Nation is the rightful owners of this land. The Tiwa Nation is, in fact, still here. The Tiwa Nation is not only fighting for their land back, they're fighting to end resource extraction, to end destruction of water, to end destruction of land and life, and to protect the resources that we all need to survive. So them fighting for their land back is advancing the struggle for all humanity, just like all indigenous peoples around the world fighting for their land back is advancing the very same cause. So when we say land back, it is not a metaphor, it is a promise. So yeah, I'm going to pass it over to Monica to get us into the political education portion of the show.
Thank you so much, Onyesawu. So today's topic is about immigration and border imperialism. And so I am excited to share with you information. It might be new information, or you all might be dropping information in the comments so we get a chance to also learn more. And so talking about imperialism and the refugee crisis that we see happening. So point blank, because of imperialism, so what imperialism does is it goes to other countries and it exploits, it extracts, it creates destitute and ways people cannot survive in tremendous amount of poverty. And they do that in many different forms. They do that by militarization of the police. They do that by actually militarization of the military. They do that by doing stolen wealth. They do that in many different forms. And they also don't hide it. They don't hide what they're doing. And what we see is and also war, right? Imperialism creates war and famine and so many other things. And what we see is refugees, people from their countries they were born at, seeking refuge because of imperialism. So people from Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico, Jamaica, Haiti, Africa, these are indigenous and indigenous spaces as well as African spaces, seeking refuge because they're not able to live in their country because of the countless like corruption and imperialistic values that are being placed in their countries. So I'm going to give an example. So Onya Sabu and I have been talking about this for the last few weeks through the film series as well as weekly news. So we talked about in 1991 how the US empire did a coup in Haiti. And specifically when they did that coup in Haiti in 1991, Aristide was only, he was an democratically elected president after they had lived under decades of like dictatorships. And he was only in office for 8 months. And after 8 months, they kidnapped him and put him into exile, right? And what they did, and during that time, he was just working with the people to have like a collective governing system, right? To raise minimum wage, right? So raise minimum wage from 38 cents to $1, so people wouldn't be exploited, right? And all the things that he was trying to do was doing that with the people. And of course, imperialism counters that, right? It counters that because imperialism is all about creating the most harm that it can do, while the other country, which is the US empire, or other countries like France and Canada, get stolen wealth. And so when they did the coup in 1991, what occurred was the US military went and trained police. There also was a huge wave of immigration of Haitians seeking refuge. And it was because of the torment that was happening there. The torment, the brutality, the famine. They put in an interim government that continued even more harm, oppressing the people and doing violence toward the people in 1991. So I just learned this, I think maybe a year ago when Onya Sabu was doing a presentation nationally with all the AAPRP members. So Guantanamo Bay, what I thought was the people who was first sent there was people from Afghanistan or Iraq, when in fact the first people that were placed in this prison camp, Guantanamo Bay, which is in Cuba, were Haitians. So at the time, under the coup, over 38,000 Haitians were found like on the seas, on the borders, seeking refuge. And over 12,000 Haitians were placed in Guantanamo Bay, and they suffered hunger. They were denied healthcare. They even had an HIV camp denying people healthcare access. And in 1992, the Haitians were protesting. They were protesting what was going on. They were protesting their rights being violated. And unfortunately, they suffered abuse. So they were kicked, they were beat, they were brutalized, men, women, and children. They told their stories. Their stories are documented about the abuse that happened in Guantanamo Bay. There was even one person, Julius Vrehene, who was also beat, bruised. He was bleeding. Last time they saw him, went to the hospital. He disappeared. The community continued to ask and question where he was. And they found out he was never in Haiti. They couldn't find him in Guantanamo Bay, and no one ever gave them answers. And what they also did, Guantanamo Bay was just an enslavement camp. That's what prisons are. Prisons are the continued formation of slavery. And so even while they were there, they had cards that had the Haitian flag on it and the US Empire flagged on it, and they would have to work hours, and they would write down the hours that they worked there, the guards, and that's how they got food. and soap and commissary. When I was reading about that, it reminded me about after the Civil War ended, and our people who were enslaved had to still live with their slavers on the plantations, and they had to like work and take cards, and not take cards, they document it. They had documentation on how many hours they worked in order to have access to food. So it just reminded me of like the same repeated history. It's really trash. And because the media controls everything, what they would do is they would put up this facade, and they would have pictures of military people holding Haitian babies, or playing guitars, or doing different things to try to act like abuse wasn't happening. And it was all a facade. And what was happening was brutality, abuse, the mistreatment of our people, right? Our people, the mistreatment of Africans that were there, and their stories documenting all the atrocities, or many, I should say, of the atrocities that were occurring on Guantanamo Bay. And so that's just one example of people who were seeking refuge. They were considered refugees, placed in Guantanamo Bay under the US empire, and abused. And there's countless stories of how that happens under imperialism. And I'm going to pass it to Onyesawu.
Thanks, Monica. So the reason why we're talking about this today is obviously we've seen pictures in the US media of thousands of African people at the US-Mexico border fighting to get in, fighting for access to the resources that the United States is hoarding that were in fact stolen from them. One really important thing to understand is that though the US media is saying that all those people are Haitians, and quite a few of them are Haitians as a direct consequence of not just the 1991 coup that Monica discussed, but also the 2004 coup that overthrew the same guy that we talked about last Saturday. So thousands of Haitians are there, but there are also Africans from the continent, like from the Central African Republic, from the Congo. There are Africans from Central and South America, like from Honduras, where my family's from, Garifuna people traveling, trying to make it into the United States. And all the Africans are there because the United States empire, alongside Europe, alongside all Western imperialist countries, have been engaging in acts of extraction and, quite frankly, terrorism against a number of global South countries. These people are not fleeing their homes because they feel like it. They're not fleeing their homes because it's a fun thing to do. They're fleeing their homes because Western imperialism has made those homes unlivable, has made them unlivable. What happened to Haiti, which we've discussed in depth over the past couple of weeks, imagine that repeated dozens of times all over the planet, and you'll begin to have a sense of what exactly is happening at the US-Mexico border. So understanding that, it doesn't make any moral sense whatsoever for those folks to be living under a bridge, surrounded by barbed wire, being attacked by European men on horseback, using reins as whips, to prevent them from getting access to safety within US borders. In fact, the only reason why US borders exist and are militarily enforced, the only reason why European borders exist and are militarily enforced, the only reason why Israeli borders exist and are militarily enforced is because the wealth of these Western nations is built on the exploitation and theft and destruction of African and other global South nations, period. The wealth that the United States has was stolen from Africa and African people. The wealth that the United States has was stolen from indigenous and colonized peoples all over this world. The United States knows that wealth is stolen. The United States does not want to share that wealth. The United States would rather protect with brutal violence the wealth that is stolen from us and leave our people to die in treks, dangerous treks to get here. That is a fact. The reason why imperialist countries have borders is to protect what they stole from the rest of the world. That's it. Those people at the US-Mexico border living in quite literally concentration camps, y'all, those are concentration camps, have every right to have free access to housing, to healthcare, to jobs, to anything they need to survive at the cost of the United States. The United States has no right whatsoever to hoard that wealth from the people that it stole it from. But what the US media does is demonize them. What the US media does is leave out this context of coups and environmental destruction and resource extraction and labor exploitation and say instead, these people are coming for your stuff. And so what we see is that even African people within the United States are like, why aren't they dealing with France? Why aren't they just going home and like saying to fix their country? Because we don't understand the larger context of how the US and other imperialist countries have created this problem of mass migration. On top of that, the reason why there's so many of those folks, the reason why it's tens of thousands of Africans living desperately at the US border, surrounded by barbed wire, is because the US intentionally blocked off every process for actually getting into this country legally. US officials are constantly like, come legally, come legally, come legally. You can't do it that way, do it the right way. But they intentionally cut off all of the possible legal ways that these people could enter this country, knowing that their actions created the problem that was causing them to flee their homes in the first place. And now we see, when Biden and Harris were running for office, they made a really big show of attacking the Trump administration's immigration policy, right? When Trump was in office, people were like, oh my God, kids in cages. Oh my God, concentration camps. Oh my God, these migrant caravans. Oh my God, like they're not helping people with COVID who are being detained in immigration centers. People had all kinds of smoke for the Trump administration's policies, including Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. But then as soon as Joe Biden and Kamala Harris came into office, they not only continued the most draconian Trump administration policies, but they also escalated targeted attacks against African refugees that were trying to come into the United States. An example is Title 42 deportations. For folks that don't know, Title 42 is a law that says that if there is an imminent public health risk, if there is a chance that people could get sick by admitting a particular group of refugees, then the US states can use that as a pretext to deport those refugees. What the Trump administration did is say that people attempting to come into the United States were too big a risk during the COVID-19 pandemic to be allowed in, and so they were able to be deported right away. This is what Trump did. Biden came in while he was campaigning. He said, that's barbaric, we're not going to do it. But then he came in and deported even more people using Title 42 as a pretext. But the problem with that logic is that COVID-19 has never at any point been under control in the United States. How are these people unacceptable public health risk during a pandemic if the United States is not even doing contact tracing, if the United States does not have any kind of national health care, if the United States has no concept whatsoever of how many of its own citizens even have COVID? You're telling me Haitians, Africans, indigenous people are an unacceptable risk while hundreds of thousands of full-fledged US citizens are dying because of your inaction? That's just an excuse. It is a racist pretext to deport people who you forced to leave their homes. That is what's happening. So Biden has deported more people using Title 42 in his first 8 months in office than Trump did in the last 4 years, y'all. Biden has deported over 6,000 Haitian people, including babies and kids, using Title 42 as a pretext, and they're talking about deporting 12,000 more within the next few weeks. So, understanding that, you must admit at this point that the Biden administration is not in any way, shape, or form better than Trump on immigration. And that's not the only thing. Remember all of the moral outrage about kids in cages? Remember all of the moral outrage about family separations? All of a sudden people cared about the fact that US immigration policy is racist and barbaric, and Biden hopped on that opportunistically and said, we're going to stop that. Well, within weeks of his entering office, the United States was already reopening more child detention centers. They were already deporting unaccompanied children and babies. Those were African children and babies. They had no intention of ever improving upon the Trump administration's policies. Instead, they allowed inertia to let them continue to use them. And the reason why, and I want to say, like, there was no chance whatsoever that that was going to get better under Biden. I remember in fall of 2020, before the election, people were like frantically trying to get me to vote for these people, and I did not. And I remember having like long conversations with people, like long arguments for hours, y'all, sometimes for hours, where they were like, don't you care about the kids in cages? Don't you want something better to happen? And I'm like, y'all, it can't possibly be better. Better is not an option that is currently on the table. And the reason why I knew that to be the case before now was because if you looked at Biden's foreign policy platform, if you looked at Kamala Harris's foreign policy positions, it was extremely clear that they had every intention of escalating U.S. imperialism. They had every intention of continuing to prop up puppet leaders in Haiti that would attack the Haitian people for rising up against their rule. It was very clear they had every intention of attacking Cuba, of attacking Venezuela, of attacking any marginally socialist state on the planet. It was very clear that they had every intention of treating the entirety of Central and South America and the Caribbean as their own personal plantation. And it was very clear that they had every intention of escalating Cold War tension with China. They put that on the table. They were very clear. They didn't hide that at all. And so when I saw them saying that, at the other side of their mouth saying we're going to address these immigration issues, I'm like, your foreign policy is going to create a massive global refugee crisis. And I also know that y'all are some America first ass people, so there's no chance whatsoever that you're going to let those refugees in. And so a situation where tens of thousands of people are fleeing their homes because of U.S. foreign policy combined with an administration that wants to hoard stolen wealth means that more people are going to pile up at these borders and in these camps, and they're not going to do anything about it but send them back to devastation. And that's precisely what we're living through. People have to start to think critically, and people have to start to think long term. You can't just hear these people say, we're going to fix everything magically, and not dig deeper, and not look at what they're actually saying they're going to do. It should not have been a surprise to people that Biden was not better. One, because Biden has been in office for like decades at this point, specifically dealing with U.S. foreign policy. And he's like an old style colonizer, y'all. That is a racist ass man. That is an architect of Western imperialist intervention in Central and South America from way back. From way back. That man has been denigrating Haiti since the 80s. So there was no question that he was going to have an extremely hostile view towards those nations and toward people fleeing those nations from the United States. All you have to do is pay attention to who he actually was. But y'all let yourselves be convinced that it was possible to vote out fascism because you convinced yourself that Trump was the problem, when in fact, Trump was just the masked off version of what the U.S. empire has always been. That's all it's been. So yeah, the fact of the matter is that the Africans are at the border because of U.S. imperialist foreign policy. The Africans are at the border because the U.S. is hoarding wealth stolen from Africa and African people and wants to protect it from the people it stole it from. The Africans are at the border because the U.S. has no intention whatsoever of stopping the theft or stopping messing with other people's countries. This is why this is happening. And it's not going to stop as long as the U.S. exists as a capitalist and imperialist empire. They're going to keep overthrowing governments. They're going to keep applying economic sanctions that cripple economies and cause devastation where people can't feed their families and are forced to flee for jobs. They're going to keep creating these problems. And we have to understand that it doesn't matter if the person in office has a D next to their name or an R next to their name, whether they're red team or blue team, the policy is the same. The policy is empire over everybody. As long as the empire stands, we will have these problems. And so the solution for those of us that are African people is to understand that our destiny cannot be tied to the U.S. empire. Our destiny is tied to Africa, and the only way we will realize our liberation is if we would build one unified socialist Africa. If we recognize that the borders of African nations that exist right now were created by force, by imperialist powers at the 1884 Berlin Conference. The nations that exist in Africa now were not built by African people. Those borders are not our borders. They are not for us to defend, they're for us to destroy. No borders in Africa. Repatriation for the diaspora. One unified socialist African government that can defend African people all around the world. And we have to fight for the destruction of these fortress empires. You don't get to steal from the entire planet and then close your doors when people flee desperate looking for help. That is their wealth that is being hoarded here. Everything the U.S. is belongs to African and colonized people. They have the right to live free here with what they need. And so we have to agitate for that. Don't ask for more humane detention centers. Don't ask for easier path to citizenship. Ask for them to open this shit the fuck up. That's it. That's it. They don't get to protect stolen wealth. They need to share that shit because it belongs to these people. So anywho, like I said, Trump and Biden in terms of foreign policy have always been the same guy. Trump and Biden in terms of U.S. immigration policy, in terms of deportations and detentions and escalating that and specifically targeting African people, Biden's actually worse than Trump. As Monica mentioned, the very first people to be detained at Guantanamo Bay were Haitians that were fleeing the devastation created by the U.S.-backed coup that overthrew Aristide in 1991. They kept those Haitians without hearing or appeal for years. If they had HIV, they were kept even longer. And now the Biden administration is talking about detaining Haitian people at Guantanamo once again. There was a point in U.S. history where the people in power were too scared to openly detain immigrants and refugees in concentration camps. It's actually very recent that this is the dominant form of immigration policy in the United States. It first started under U.S. President Reagan. It first started under U.S. President H.W. Bush. But when Reagan was president and Rudy Giuliani was in his administration, Rudy Giuliani openly said, we have all these folks coming in from Haiti and from Cuba who were mostly single African men. We don't know what to do, but we're afraid of portraying an image of keeping Africans in concentration camps. Rudy Giuliani said that under Reagan. But then George H.W. Bush came in, the coup that deposed Aristide happened, tens of thousands of Haitians began to flee. The United States put them in Guantanamo, and there was no national outcry. The backlash that Rudy Giuliani was afraid of never came. And so when they did that to Haitians and no one spoke up, or very few people spoke up, they realized they could get away with it. And that was the birth of modern policies of immigration detention. It was also under George H.W. Bush where the very first privately controlled, privately owned immigration detention centers were open. What is that name? It's like CCA now, but I forget what the acronym stands for, but it's one of the major companies behind private prisons and private detention centers. The very first facilities that company ran were private immigration detention centers under George H.W. Bush. So Haitian immigrants, Haitian refugees that were again fleeing the consequences of U.S. imperialism were quite frankly the canary in the coal mine when it came to modern immigration policies. But because it was happening to African people, and because African people in the United States at the time were in the height of a counter-revolution against us, were in the height of the crack epidemic in our communities, we did not have the organization to fight back. And so they saw they could get away with it if they did to African people, and they were like, well, fuck it, we can do it to other people too. And that's how we got to where we are today. U.S. imperialism caused a massive refugee crisis. Tens of thousands of people tried to flee for safety. The United States put them in a concentration camp on stolen Cuban land in Guantanamo Bay. No one fought back. And then they were like, okay, we can keep doing this. We can escalate this. And now we're at the point in 2021 where so-called progressive U.S. elected officials like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are like, yes, kids are in cages, but they're nice cages. Like, this is the point we're at now, where there was a point where they were too afraid to put people in these camps, and now there's like babies in the camps, and progressive politicians are like, this is fine. The person in charge is like a blue guy, so it's different. So this is where we're at. Understand, it's only going to get worse from here. Like I said, the U.S. empire has no intention whatsoever of engaging in a non-interventionist foreign policy, which means they're going to continue to blockade and sanction and coup and invade their way to an attempt at global dominations, which means there's going to be continuing refugee crises that are going to be compounded by catastrophic climate change, making so many places unlivable. The United States has no intention whatsoever of sharing the wealth they stole. And so these refugees at the border, these refugees in these camps, the numbers are going to continue to go up. And do not forget that if you are in a concentration camp at the U.S.-Mexico border, if you are in a concentration camp that is one of these concentration camps that are dotted across U.S. cities, you are regularly denied access to medical care. These people are not getting treatment for COVID-19. They're not being given like capacity to social distance or wear masks. They're not being vaccinated. So it's going to cause not just a humanitarian crisis, but a massive public health crisis that US citizens will not be able to escape. So yeah, the solution is to destroy these empires. The solution is not to defend US's borders or Europe's borders or any imperialist borders, but to say that those borders must be knocked down, that this is not your land to defend or protect, that these people have a right to share in the wealth you stole from them, and that you have to stop messing with other countries. You have to stop overthrowing governments that are for the people. You have to stop sanctioning countries because they won't do what you want. That's it. We have to fight to build an anti-imperialist mass movement that can actually contest for power and have a say when the United States is trying to fuck with other people. We live in the belly of the beast. Like, if you are a person who's like, I am opposed to immigration, then you should be the staunchest anti-imperialist that exists. Because the only reason immigration is happening right now, the only reason thousands of people are streaming towards the United States is because of US imperialist foreign policy. So if you're like, America first, then you better be the biggest anti-imperialist on this planet, y'all. Because that is the only thing that's going to stop immigration. These people are not going to stop coming. They're not going to stop because the United States will not stop fucking with them. Anyway, to talk a little bit more in detail about what is going on in these centers, again, under President Joe Biden, I'm going to pass it back to Monica.
Thank you so much, Onyesawu, for that information. I know it's Core Civic now. You were talking about CCA, Corrections Corporation of America. Core Civic, it is also here in Tiwa territory and all over New Mexico, actually. One of the private, we have two private prison main people here, profiting off the suffering of people for sure. So on the border, we see the child detention and family separation. Onyesawu pointed out how that this immigration policy started under the first Bush administration. Then Clinton did the criminal alien program, and that deported, over 40,000 people a year. It was just really a pipeline for like exclusion of keeping, again, indigenous people and Africans out of these borders that should not exist. And the family separate, and then Obama, the policy expanded under the Obama administration, and families were then being separated. As a matter of fact, there are a couple of pictures that we see circulate under the Trump administration, and that was actually occurring under the Obama administration. So then Trump did this zero policy, and you saw this pour of outcry of people saying to stop the family separation. And so just for some context a little bit. So also going back to Obama, I want to go back there real quick, because what happened under the Obama administration, which led to what we see now under Trump, is Obama invested $60 million in border security, $600 million, which increased Border Patrol agents, ICE agents, and Customs protection. It was literally over 1,500 agents across all three departments that occurred. And the Border Patrol budget is now doubled. It tripled in size, and it's one of the second largest budget expenditure under the US empire. So that's what we see happening under the border. We know when Kamala and Biden were running, they were preaching one thing about what they wanted to do on the border and not do family separation. And somebody posted in the comments, what was she shouting? Don't come here, right after she was elected. So again, that's what they do. Don't matter if you're blue or red, they are all about keeping up the US empire. And so we know that on the border, that children and families are still being separated. We know that they're being placed in cages, that they've been denied medical treatment, that they still have lack of soap, lack of clothing. There's still been sexual assault happening. We know babies have been separated. Babies have been separated from their families. So this has not stopped. And from when Clinton was in office, and they implemented Operation Gatekeeping in California, Hold the Line in Texas, Operation Safeguard in Arizona. Over those last 6 years, we have also seen an increase in people on the border being killed. So people who are seeking refuge because the US empire is destroying their country have been killed by border patrol. That's what we see happening. Also, on top of that, not only does this country incarcerate more people than any other country, this country also has the largest detention system. And all of it is rooted in anti-Blackness, is rooted in anti-Indigenous. Our people are overrepresented in those spaces, whether it's in this country incarcerated or whether it's on the border incarcerated. Indigenous folks as well as African folks are overrepresented in those spaces, and it's they're because of the huge boost in private prisons on the border under the Trump administration, and then they built more for children under Biden. You know, we don't even know. We know that the private prison system in this country is over $50 billion. With all the cages on the border, who knows now how much CoreCivic and other private prisons are making off of the suffering of people. There is deep trauma happening, y'all. Deep trauma happened to these families, to these children. Imagine being separated. And also what these policies are doing is like, it's a deter. Like all the policies are trying to, so this imperialism, like border policies are trying to deter people from coming here. And actually it's like a death sentence because with those policies, they are acting on more and more and more violence, whether that's murdering them on the border or whether that's beating them when they're in these cages, whether that's sexual assault. So all of it is, or whether it's denying medical treatment and people dying, right, within these institutions that are just plantations. So basically what they did was continue to build out plantations on the border. And nothing has changed under the Biden administration. So remember, Biden said if he was elected, he would close them. More were open to house children, y'all. It's really frustrating. It's really saddened to see the continued horrors that happens against colonized folks. And, you know, like Onya Savu, I just want to echo, people were just saying, it's going to get better under Biden. We got to vote for Biden and we got to get Trump out. I wasn't saying that, but, you know, a lot of people were saying that. I'm like, same system, right? No matter if it's red or blue, it's all to uphold what this country stands for. Like this country was established on stolen land and genocide and the enslavement of our people. And that is literally what's happening on the border, the same exact damn thing. Nothing's changed and it won't change until imperialism and capitalism falls.
So I mentioned, we're talking a lot about the US-Mexico border because we're based in the United Snakes. But the dynamic that we're talking about, where imperialist intervention from the US government creates refugee crises that force people to flee their homes for a better life. The same dynamic that's happening coming from the US empire is also happening on Europe's borders, it's also happening on Israel's borders, it's also happening on Australia's borders. So I just want to I found this graphical representation of what I'm talking about. So I'm just going to share my screen very quickly. Boop, boop. Did that work? Can you see my screen? No. Hold on.
I can see it.
Okay. I should have just done that. So this is from an article from The Big Think called The Walled World, which refers to what we know as the West, which is made up, again, of the United Snakes, of Europe, of Israel, despite it being in the Middle East, and Australia. That's the West. And the West makes up what this article refers to as the walled world. And it's a very easy to understand graphical representation of what we're trying to convey to y'all. So you can see here, this is the walled world traced out. And you can see here, it says 73% of the world's income is held within the walled world or the West. The walled world or the Western world also only contains 14% of the world's population. 73% of the world's income and 14% of the world's population are contained in the West. That is a drastic minority of the human beings on Earth. At the same time, the folks that are kept out of the walled world, the folks that are like throwing their bodies against these borders trying to survive, are 86% of the world's population, but only control 27% of the world's income. Are you beginning to understand why these walls exist? Are you beginning to understand why the US and Europe have such militarized borders? Because they are literally stealing the vast majority of humanity's wealth from the majority of the people on the planet. They are literally trying to keep the people they stole from out. And the dynamic we're talking about at the US-Mexico border, where people are living in concentration camps, where people are often enduring months of travel, where they face brutality, extortion, rape, all kinds of abuse, on the way to the US-Mexico border, that same dynamic exists on the European border as well. Like, as we speak, thousands of African people have died trying to cross the Mediterranean, escaping from the African continent, escaping from failed neo-colonial states that are being exploited by imperialism, making a very treacherous trip around the Mediterranean, and many of them are straight up dying. And Europe knows this. It's been happening for over a decade, and there is no plan to stop it. In certain Mediterranean coast European cities, African bodies regularly wash up on the beach. The people live there have just come to accept it. Europe knows why these people are trying to make it there. Europe knows that it stole this wealth from Africa. But Europe is so committed to hoarding what it has stolen that it is allowing, again, tens of thousands of African people to make this extremely dangerous journey only to die in the fucking sea, y'all. So I just wanted to reiterate that this is not a US problem. This is an imperialism problem. This is a capitalism problem. This exists on the borders of all first world Western nations. Period. This is a function of how this system works. Some people hoard all of the wealth and everybody else can go die. It is not sustainable. Unless you are the 1%, unless you are the ruling class, there is a day coming on the current trajectory we are on where you might have to flee your home, where you might not have access to the resources that you and your family need to live. Understand, right now it seems very far away, but the trajectory that capitalism has us on, the destruction that's happening to the planet, means sooner rather than later, we are all going to face that desperate a choice. Your first world privilege is not going to insulate you from what's coming. So we, as people, poor and working class African people within these empires, have a responsibility to align ourselves with the masses outside the wall. That's it. Those are our people. That's who's dying in the Mediterranean. That's who's in those concentration camps. Those are our family. We have to fight for them. Not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it's coming for us. It is coming for us. So I just wanted to share that. What are we talking about next? What's next?
Thank you so much, Onyesawu. I just wanted to share that Comrade Erica said if you could drop that link on the YouTube and Facebook channel so folks can see it, because it is an invaluable graphic.
Yes, I can do that. We'll share afterwards. And someone pointed out the Big Think is funded by the Koch brothers. That would very well be the case, but those statistics are accurate and that graphical depiction is accurate. US borders, European borders, Israeli borders, Australia has the same motherfucking problem. That walled world graphic is accurate. The first so-called first world nations of this planet control the majority of the wealth. They are stealing it from Africa and Central and South America and Southeast Asia. And the only way it's going to stop is if we unite across the borders as poor, working class, and colonized peoples to take back the wealth that's been stolen from us and to force these empires to open up. That's it. An American first policy is not a coherent strategy if you are a poor, working class, colonized person. But yeah, I do appreciate folks pointing out the funding, and we'll drop that link in the chat.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add two more things to what's happening in our detention centers. Excuse me, wrong. What's happening in these are not ours. What's happening in the detention centers on the border, the immigration detention centers, is we also know that women were being sterilized without consent, right? As well as being denied medical treatment under COVID-19. And we know the people behind the walls have a rate from either 4 to 7 times more likely to get COVID and die behind the walls because of you can't social distance. They're not providing masks. They're not providing soap. They're not providing cleansing. We know people in this country, people behind the walls had to like literally do riots, like burning stuff in order to get their needs met. Imagine what's happening on the border where you know, in these plantations, nobody has rights under these. So just wanting to share that there's even more conditions happening to our people and colonized folks. And I agree with exactly what Onyesawu, that's who we need to tie ourselves to. These are our people, and those other colonized folks are our people as well. That's who we're tied to. We're not tying to any allegiance to this trashy country. Go ahead, Onyesawu, you want to share anything?
Yes, I just want to say, so very quickly, a lot of the discourse about the U.S.-Mexico border and the thousands of Africans are there has focused on Haitians. And like we already laid out, it is many Haitians there because of U.S. interventions against Haiti, but it's also Africans from the continent. It's also Africans from Central and South America as well. But specifically about Haiti, it is very important to understand what is happening to Haiti within the larger context of imperialism. And what I mean by that is that it's easy to see what's happening at the border and be like, that's happening because those folks are Black. Definitely that's a part of it. However, it's very important to understand like what Haiti represents. It's not just the fact that they're African. U.S. hates Africans. It's a white supremacist country, there's no question. But the reason why Haiti is treated in this particular way by imperialist nations is because Haitian people successfully overthrew white supremacist slave and settler rule. The model of the Haitian Revolution was a model that terrified the United States and imperialist countries. Haitians successfully waged a military struggle against the biggest empires at the time, and they won. And not only did they win and form a free nation, but then they said, we are going to fight for the liberation of all of the Africans in this hemisphere. Understand how shook the United States and imperialist powers were by that example. They were terrified that it will be replicated by other Africans. They were terrified. So it's not just about the fact that they're African or Black. It's about the fact that they fought back against an empire and they won. And not only that, the first U.S. sanctions against Haiti were placed by U.S. President Thomas Jefferson in 1806, 2 years after the Haitian Revolution. In the 200 years since the Haitian Revolution, the United States has occupied Haiti 3 times. They have overthrown multiple Haitian governments, Aristide 2 times, which we already discussed at length. They have sanctioned the Haitian economy over and over and over again. And despite all of these interventions, despite all of these attempts to destroy the day-to-day lives of the masses of African people in Haiti, the massive African people in Haiti have never stopped fighting back. They have never stopped fighting back. The United States puts a puppet in there, and Haitians are in the street, rising up, fighting back, and naming the United States as their oppressor. They are clear. So it's not just about their skin color. It's about what they did and continue to do. Haiti is a model of resistance that is extremely terrifying to our oppressors, but is extremely important for us to learn from and to replicate. They are terrified of Haitians because what a Haitian is going to do is a Haitian is going to fight back, y'all. So I just want to make that very clear, that it's not just about what we look like, it's about the threat they pose to imperialism. Period. So yeah, I just want to say that very quickly. Anywho, what's next?
So next is New Mexico chapter updates. Thank you, Onya Sawu, for dropping that context and knowledge for us to understand what Haiti has done and how it is critical for us to learn from them. So in Tiwa territory, so the Pan-African Community Garden, man, y'all, we got to harvest some veggies. The Black Student Union at Highland came out with us, got to read some political education with them, and just excited for us to continue growing food. We just planted some winter crops to grow. So excited to continue growing in the garden, and hopefully we'll be having a shade structure up soon.
Can I share the PE we did?
Oh yeah, please.
So the PE we read at the garden was an article published on Cook Communist a few weeks ago. You might have seen it, breaking down the Saweetie meal at McDonald's, written by our comrade Sally Boo. And we had like such a rich conversation about that article, because like the youth from the BSU and all the folks at the garden like knew who Saweetie was and had heard of the meal. But what that article does, and I highly recommend folks read it, is it talks about the massive African people, Saweetie, McDonald's, and McDonald's workers, and breaks down how all of these groups, besides McDonald's, are exploited by this meal in detail. So it's like something that I just really like this article. That's why I want to talk about it, because it was like such effective political education for the BSU folks. Like taking like a McDonald's meal, like something that's in popular culture that everybody sees, and breaking it down with a revolutionary socialist and revolutionary Pan-Africanist analysis is a really effective political education tool. And so I just wanted to shout out that article specifically because it started like a really important conversation at the garden with like high school kids who were like, oh yeah, I get this. So it was awesome. So yeah, shout out to Sally Boo for that writing.
Awesome. I was dropping the article in the chat. Sorry about that. We are also doing our elder care program. We're still doing it. So we started that during the pandemic. So anyone in Tiwa territory that is an African elder, we deliver care packages every weekend to our community members. And so if you know an elder who is in need of some food and resources, we also drop off political education as well. We had one of the elders join the chapter as well. So excited about our elder care program. The Cuba Solidarity Car van, this happens every last Sunday of the month at 12 p.m. It's going to be happening on September 26th, being supported by the Anti-War Coalition and the Los Vecinos Brigade. We're going to be meeting at 12 p.m. on San Mateo and Copper. Come out, bring your cars. We'll have some markers that are right, and we'll do a caravan. There'll be some political education in the beginning and do a caravan. This Sunday, we're not at the Pan-African Community Garden, but we are sharing information about the Haven. So the Haven is located on 4025 Isleta, so it's in the valley. From 2 to 7 p.m. They're going to be having music, food, community from 2 to 3 p.m. Come, our elder African Ron is going to be talking about bees and pollination, and there's going to be a bee observation, being able to eat honey, just learning. That's going to be for the kids. So bring the kids out from 2 to 3 this Sunday. And they're going to be out there till 7:30, y'all. So you can just drop in. The beautiful thing about the Haven, it's being remodeled and it's being dreamt by community. So this space is like, what can the community dream to be a resource space? It's going to be the second abolitionist home in the country, and wanting to design it on creating safe spaces for I shouldn't say safe spaces, creating spaces for our young people and letting them vision and dream what they want to see. So come out and you can see like they're working on the roof, they're working on the restrooms, there's electricity and water now. Appreciate like all the work that people have been going out, people just been sharing their time to get that space up. Food is growing. They got squash and carrots and cucumbers. There's like what else are there? Oh, jalapenos. I've had some jalapenos. They got bunnies there. They got rabbits. So go check out the Haven. Every second Saturday of the month, We also do a Pan-African film series. We do this now virtually because of the pandemic. We want to make sure everyone's safe. We're going to be screening a documentary. It's at 2 p.m. It's going to be the screening of Mugabe, Villain or Hero. So come join us for that on the second Saturday of the month. And I'm going to pass it to Onyesawu for our closing.
Cool. I just want to say I'm really excited about the October film series, the documentary about Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe, because he is a controversial figure among some elements of the Western left, but the revolutionary Pan-Africanist left has never turned its back on that man. And so the documentary is going to lay out both sides, and I am sure that someone's going to watch it and get really mad, and you know that just excites me. I like courting the controversy when it's about ideas. So yeah, very excited for that on October 9th. But anyway, this has been Weekly Pan-African News, presented to you by All African People's Revolutionary Party in New Mexico. We do this show every single Thursday at 12 p.m. Mountain Time, which means next week we're going to be back with another topic that we have not decided yet. We got to plan these out more in advance, and we will at our all program meeting soon. But tune in next week for another show from a revolutionary Pan-African perspective. We want to remind y'all that even though the U.S. government is trying to pretend that this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated because it wants to dehumanize unvaccinated people, COVID-19 is still a real thing, whether you're vaccinated or not. Remember that even if you've gotten both doses of the shot, that you are still able to contract and spread the virus. So please remember to wear your mask. Please remember to social distance. Please remember to be extra careful if you are regularly in community with elders or immunocompromised people. We definitely encourage you to get the vaccine if that's the right choice for you, if you want to do that, with the guidance of your medical professional. But understand that we are on our own when it comes to this pandemic. They have failed at every turn, whether Democrat or Republican, to provide effective relief for the masses of people in the United States, which means it's up to us to take care of each other. It's up to us to continue to mask up and to social distance and to get the treatments and vaccinations necessary to prevent the spread of this virus. It's also up to us to organize a movement that can demand the kind of public health response that is required to actually contain it. The kind of public health response we've seen in cases like Cuba and China, to be awesome. Like, the United States hates giving China credit, but China took care of it. China not only had an effective lockdown that was able to contain the spread, but China also developed vaccines. It's helping to develop Cuba's vaccines. It's sending you know what I'm saying? It's possible to do this well. The United States has not done it well. The only way that we're going to get the response we need as this pandemic continues to escalate into the winter is if we join organizations fighting for rights, fighting for social justice, and build a movement that is powerful enough to demand what is needed and win those demands. So we need an eviction moratorium. We need cancellation of rent. Make it so no one can be evicted and make it so no one owes any back rent because they're trying to stay home during a pandemic and can't work. We need national health care. We need national health care. We need to pay people to stay home. We need to return to contact tracing. We need to have a nationwide contact tracing program to actually understand how many people are sick with this virus. We need basic public health measures to make sure people understand the implications of catching COVID and how they can spread it and prevent the spread. None of those things exist in the United States. This is what we need to survive. The only way we're going to get those things is if we fight for them and demand them. So please, 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 join an organization fighting for justice. Join an organization that has a political education program that is required for all of its members. Join an organization where you are able to dissent regardless of the level or rank or whatever of the person you're disagreeing with. Join an organization where you are pushed to grow in a way that honors you, in a way that is not abusive, in a way that says that you are a whole person making the best contribution you can, and that is okay. Join an organization. If the organization you want to see in the world does not exist, then you can build one on your own. You don't need permission from anybody. You don't need special skills. You don't need any special knowledge base. Any one of us can get two friends together and start an organization fighting for what we believe in. There's a new organization here in Tiwa territory, the Hookup, that a lot of our comrades are in. And it's literally folks passing out mutual aid to houseless community and sex workers. And that's folks who just decided they wanted to do that. And now we're just doing it. No one gave them permission. They were just we're going to do it. So you can just do that. See the gap that exists in your community, see what you want to organize around, and build an organization around that. You are allowed to do it. You don't need anything. So please, either way, if you're not an organization, join one. If you want to start one, please do. But we need you active in the fight, fighting for these demands that we need around COVID-19, fighting to end this empire, fighting to resist imperialism until the empire falls. Like, we need y'all. We need everybody. All hands on deck. Also, today is Thursday, which means there's new writing on the Hood Communist blog, which you can check out at hoodcommunist.org. Please do. And we want to say thank you so much for joining us. Please stay tuned for some promotions for upcoming APRP events and some music. Have a good day.
Hey! Atom! Reloaded! Atom! Reloaded! Junior! Ha! Yawa Krum! Yawa Krum! Rastafuwa Krum! Rastafuwa Krum! Yawa Krum! Harafuwa Krum! Harafuwa Krum! Yawa Krum! Fresh boys, fresh girls! Fresh boys, fresh girls! Yawa Krum! Where am I? I'm Shafe, I'm Kwajalami! Yawa Krum! Rastafuwa Krum! Rastafuwa Krum! Yawa Krum! Harafuwa Krum! Harafuwa Krum! Yawa Krum! Fresh boys, fresh girls! Fresh boys, fresh girls! Yawa Krum! Where am I? I'm Shafe, I'm Kwajalami! Yawa Krum! Me wo krum, asha wata so dia yan shimbo. Me jimani, me kunko in the lion's den. Chata boom, don't try me. Me dribble, harof wo you fear in some mampom. Yes, ya di bebo money in the back, sika shake go to kum. I got them before, no be property. Depend ya intimidation party. Manum pisha, pasho, nanatachi, alomo kasapreku when try daddy. Yawo krum bisa kubabu, ene taju. Ye tudo, untimin chia mugu. Ye disi kapudo, sign jabi tusu. For the blessing na, ayajuju. Rastafuwa Krum, Rastafuwa Krum, Yawa Krum. Harafuwa Krum, Harafuwa Krum, Yawa Krum. Fresh boys, fresh girls, fresh boys, fresh girls, Yawa Krum. Where am I? I'm Shafe, I'm Kwajalami, Yawa Krum. Rastafuwa Krum, Rastafuwa Krum, Yawa Krum. Harafuwa Krum, Harafuwa Krum, Yawa Krum. Fresh boys, fresh girls, fresh boys, fresh girls, Yawa Krum. Where am I? I'm Shafe, I'm Kwajalami. Young times if I'm in the manty, yeah. Friday night, a boy and Nachi, forget to was it. And if I not saw just mama son tonight, I will room. I was so come magazine, yeah, born to a yo salamujin. Yeah, and I join your table, bitch, feeling free. Last time, pensa, one roll nicodine, and you dope. When you see car, you the joke. Guess if I broke, cause coffee, I broke. Work hard on the low. Anything for the dough, like check the dough. Come at us, what in your wedding. My money too strong to me here, wedding. And then me will get that's what I'm saying. You can ask about me way back, I don't sing. You will come. Rastafuwa Krum, Rastafuwa Krum, Yawa Krum. Harafuwa Krum, Harafuwa Krum, Yawa Krum. Fresh boys, fresh girls, fresh boys, fresh girls, Yawa Krum. Where am I? I'm Shafe, I'm Kwajalami, Yawa Krum. Rastafuwa Krum, Rastafuwa Krum, Yawa Krum. Harafuwa Krum, Harafuwa Krum, Yawa Krum. Fresh boys, fresh girls, fresh boys, fresh girls, Yawa Krum. Where am I? I'm Shafe, I'm Kwajalami, Roma Yende. Ya brokeke, sorry the asa, so do for some man who say. Today be today, Obi Ajini pay. Sister Aisha, young shisha, no cocaine. Oh, new generation, money belongs to the youth. Some build mansions, others they drink pepper soup. What be the action? You for look sharp, don't be thief. Millions and thousands. Let's be one and just forget the beef. Rastafuwa Krum, Rastafuwa Krum, Yawa Krum. Harafuwa Krum, Harafuwa Krum, Yawa Krum. Fresh boys, fresh girls, fresh boys, fresh girls, Yawa Krum. Where am I? I'm Shafe, I'm Kwajalami, Yawa Krum. Rastafuwa Krum, Rastafuwa Krum, Yawa Krum. Harafuwa Krum, Harafuwa Krum, Yawa Krum. Fresh boys, fresh girls, fresh boys, fresh girls.